All right, we're live, everyone. Thank you, Mr. John Poe, for joining me this evening. And to our viewers, John Poe is a retired police chief from, tell me again which city you retired as chief of police from.
I retired from the city of River Rouge, and after that, I ended my career in the city of Luna Pier, Michigan, as the chief of
Fantastic.
police.
And John also has a YouTube channel called Poe On The Go, which is a
Yes, sir.
DIY crafting channel. And I'll post a link to that in the description down below. What we want to talk about tonight is Scientology's fair game tactics. Scientology has fair game policies. People who are expelled, people who criticize the church can be destroyed utterly and ruined by Scientologists without any repercussions from Scientology. And people ask all the time why law enforcement doesn't do more about Scientology's harassment and attacks on its former members. And I wanted to get your perspective on that. Is this protected religious activity, or does it fall under the same terms of the law as anything else would?
Well, it doesn't fall under a protected religious activity. Anytime an activity by an organization, no matter what it is, gets into the realm where it starts violating personal rights, starts violating things such as you're assaulting people, creating a mass disturbance in the streets and different areas and like that, it's not a matter of religious rights. It's a matter of going out and personally attacking people. And that's where it starts getting into the area of actual criminal. Some of the other areas would be under the civil matters, which we don't work with. But when it starts breaking down, like you see the videos where they will have a mass grouping come up and surround someone at an airport or something like that, and they're yelling and screaming at them, they're smacking their phone out of their hands, things like that. Those all start falling into many different areas. You've got the disorderly person, you've got assault and battery, you've got damage to property. And if it starts getting into more and more of these encounters with the same people on the same individual, then it starts getting into these stalking and intimidation laws, which actually start falling into felony realms. And none of that's protected.
What is the legal point at which harassment becomes stalking?
Well, the first we have to look at what the definition of harassment is. Harassment is a combination of more than one unwanted or unwarranted encounters between an individual and the victim. And most times it's going to be 2, 3, 4 encounters where it starts building into harassment. And I used to get it a lot of times. I'd pull someone over for a traffic stop and they would say, "Why are you harassing me?" "Well, this is the first time I've ever met you." "Yeah, well, police stopped me last week, so this is harassment." Sorry, not in a definition of law, and I have no idea who stopped you. Once it starts getting to the point where it's more than just harassment, it's a continual abuse. There are several different things that the victim can do. They can get in the state of Michigan, it's called a personal protection order, a PPO. I believe in other states they call it a peace bond. There's a bunch of different names, but basically it says you can't come in contact with this person, whether it be in person, whether it be through telephone calls, through now it's electronic communications, or on social media posts, those kinds of things. And if those areas start breaking down and it's causing actual real disruption to a person's life, or it's getting to a point where they're actually harming this person, that's where it starts getting into the stalking area. And that's once it starts becoming a felony.
So one of the ways that Scientology does this is they will hire attorneys who will hire private investigators, who will hire thugs to do whatever needs to be done. How is law enforcement ever able to protect people against stuff like that?
Well,
You can't. Well, go ahead.
what has to be done is when the officers, one of the big problems is that you'll have one officer will handle this encounter, a completely different officer on a different shift will handle another encounter. And that all comes down to communication. In our department, before we started our shifts, we had roll calls. And say if we had a situation where you had a group like this was doing something to someone, the prior shift, the commander would let the next shift commander know what's going on. We've got this report. We took these calls. These people have been doing this. You guys need to keep an eye out on it. So when the next shift comes on, they're prepared for these encounters, and they're able to handle them properly. Um, when you get into these bigger cities, sometimes it's not that easy, where you have departments over 100 officers, where they're putting 30 or 40 officers out on the street at a time. It gets real hard to start piecing those together. That's where a good detectives bureau is going to have to come in, and they're going to start looking at, I've got this complaint on this day, I've got this complaint. These are all starting to add up, and well, gee, it's two different guys from the same private investigation company. What are they doing? You start investigating that way. And like I was saying, when you start learning as a police officer, you start training after you get out of the academy, and you're with the older officers. They're going to tell you, if you have a problematic source that you need to start taking care of, you need to start building what's called a paper trail on them. And that's what they need to do, is they need to start building these paper trails, and they need to start following up with them and making sure that things are kept in check.
Is it true that private investigators can get away with a certain type of activity that people without private investigators licenses could not get away with without being
It,
charged with harassment or stalking?
it's going to vary from state to state, but it doesn't matter if you're a private investigator or not. The moment that someone says, I want no contact with you, leave me alone, you need to start backing off. And if
Even
it's
if
a
you're a private
continual thing,
investigator?
what's that?
Even if you're a private investigator?
Well, here's the thing. There's a difference between staying back, 300-400 feet and videotaping them, watching what they're doing, as to actually confronting them and following them around, and this is where things get real bad, is people get scared, and they've got this cars following them. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're going to do to them. I mean, when you hear about these stories about people who've blown, and they actually send out teams to snatch them and bring them back, someone who's in that situation, and now they have these group of guys or men and women that are following them around everywhere they go. Someone gets frightened and they blow that red light and they cause an accident that kills a family. That's all going to fall right back on those private investigators, because they caused this. So it's they have to follow the laws themselves. They aren't above. They can't be blowing red lights. They can't be going onto people's property after they've been told not to, things like that. There are a lot of limitations to them. And here in Michigan, you have to be a licensed private investigator in the state of Michigan. And it requires quite a bit. If you were a police officer and you want to get your private investigator's license, you have to have 4 years in law enforcement, and you have to show that you have been investigating criminal cases as a police officer. So it's not a very easy license to get. And, so a lot of these guys we have a lot of private investigators that are police officers or former police officers. They don't want to jeopardize their career by doing something and get them in a lot of trouble.
Right. So you mentioned that creating the paper trail necessary to connect a lot of these dots requires cooperation and coordination amongst officers, particularly in big cities where there's a lot of officers on the streets, different officers handling different things that come up. So if you take a city like Los Angeles, and this is pertinent because, in the Danny Masterson civil trial, I'm trying to think, I want to say all three of the Jane Does in the criminal trial. All three of those Jane Does are involved in the civil case, which is regarding harassment they've experienced at the hands of Scientology and Danny Masterson. I believe they all live in Los Angeles, or at least did, meaning one of them might not live in LA anymore, but she did during the period of harassment. Anyway, I'm just trying to cover all my bases here. When you have a city that large, and in order to create the paper trail, it would require police cooperation and coordination. And then you have the Scientology monetary influence that we're aware of in the Hollywood area. How does something like that affect the officers' willingness to all coordinate with each other on Scientology-related matters?
Well, it's going to boil down to the officers have to communicate. And if you have a detective or someone like that isn't communicating, you have to, if you're the person making the formal complaint on it, you have to make sure that you're following up with things. I get a lot of people, when I was a detective, that they would file a complaint and I would try to contact them. I couldn't get in contact with them. 3 or 4 months later, they'd call me and go, "What's going on with my case?" Well, I've been trying to get in touch with you. Why haven't you tried calling me before now? And a lot of people think that once you file a complaint, it's over. Everything is handled. And unfortunately, that's not how it works. Oftentimes when I'm doing a criminal complaint, I have to get in contact with that complainant. I have to have an actual written statement from them, get them in, interview them, get the facts that I need to back up that case. And if they're not cooperative with me, I can't go anywhere with it. And then in a situation like the Danny Masterson one, you might have the DA is actually waiting to see what happens with that civil case, so that they get those folks on the stand, they get them answering questions that otherwise they would clam up or say, I want my attorney here. I'm not saying anything else without my attorney. But they get in there on that civil case thinking they're not going to be criminally charged, and they start letting things out. Now the DA has actual court records, which is public record, of what was said that gives them evidence to further bolster their case for the harassment, stalking, intimidation, those kinds of things.
Right. So when Scientology does do most of its harassment, like if they would almost never these days do it directly themselves. Again, like I said, talking lawyers, private investigators, and the private investigators. I guess this is my next question: Can a private investigator legally hire someone else to work for them, who that person is the one doing the harassment and has no legal connection to the PI?
It varies from state to state, but in most states you have a licensed private investigator, and they can hire people under their license to work for them. But then again, their license is predicated on the fact of whether or not they're violating the law. If someone can show that they are actually violating criminal law, they can lose their license altogether. And what you get is you get these guys, they're doing a lot of it under the radar. By the time the police get there, the private investigators are gone. So they, prove it. That's a big thing. And it's, the great thing is nowadays we've all got an instant studio in our pockets. So if you're getting in a situation like that, get that phone out and start recording automatically, because you can show, here it is on Tuesday, this guy came up to me and approached me. Wednesday he did it. Thursday he did it twice. Here's all the video, and that can all be handed right in to make your complaint.
Right. I'll tell you, this is one aspect of the civil case that has had me very worried ever since the mistrial was declared in the Danny Masterson case, and that is that even though in the civil trial the standard of evidence, or the difference between guilt beyond a reasonable doubt and preponderance of the evidence. So how would you describe that? Is it the standard of the evidence is lower? Is that the right way to describe it?
That would be it. It's not as strict. I wouldn't call it lower. In a criminal case, you have to show beyond reasonable doubt that this person committed the crime. You've got to present enough evidence. You've got to have enough witness testimony that prove this person committed the crime, or at least gives the jury beats all reasonable doubt on it. When it comes to a civil trial, it's not quite as tight on things. But win or lose on this civil trial, there's a lot of things that can come out in testimony, especially on the part of these private investigators and other people that are part of the organization, that can lead to criminal charges in the future. And
that's true. Now, that's one of the reasons why the civil trial has been put on hold until the criminal trial is resolved, is so that you don't have witnesses pleading the fifth in a civil trial, because they're literally in the middle of the criminal trial. And I think that is going to continue to be the case. The civil trial will continue to be on hold until the criminal matter is resolved.
Another thing is when you have a situation where you're going to law enforcement, you've made your criminal complaint, you're making the checks with the detective like you're supposed to, you've made your statement, you've gone in, you've done everything like you need to, you're still not getting anywhere with it. Next thing is if you need to go over that officer's head, every department has someone who handles internal affairs. Every department has someone that handles complaints against officers. It's not always the most liked thing in the world, but it's necessary evil, because there's possibility for anything out there. If that's, that's not working, next thing is go to the media and, say, look, I've been working with these guys for 6 months. They're doing nothing. They won't tell me anything. Just, well, look what's going on. Leah gets on Twitter. She starts talking to the news. Now LA's coming out with press releases, and it looks like things are starting to work again on that actual case. So, of course, she has a little more leeway where she can get the actual media to pay a little more attention to her. But in every city, they have, the Crime Stoppers. They have all these different little programs on the actual nightly news, like the Hall of Shame, those kinds of things. And they're always looking for a good story to run with. And right now, Scientology is really popular.
Right. Well, in the Masterson case, the criminal case, the Jane Does did go over the head of the detective who had been working on the case, and she ended up being removed from the case. It was a little comedic to hear this because in the trial, in the testimony, they weren't allowed to say that. And
Wow.
There was even a point where the defense attorney was objecting or something and wanted to stipulate, just because somebody was removed from a case doesn't mean it was because they did anything wrong, when in fact, that's exactly why she was removed from the case. The judge just wasn't going to allow that in because it was too prejudicial or what, something,
Right.
something like that. So, but what has had me concerned about this civil case is that even though the standard of evidence, again, I'm not sure if it's the right phrase, instead of having to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, they only have to prove it to the preponderance, like 51%, not 100%, 51%. So it's easier for them to prove what they're trying to prove. And yet what they're trying to prove seems to be a much more difficult thing to prove in the first place. And this has sort of had the wheels in my head spinning a bit, because it's one thing to show evidence that something occurred, whether it was a car broken into, a fire, an animal being poisoned. It's one thing to show that occurred. It's another thing to be able to provide evidence that it was tied to Scientology, particularly when Scientology hires lawyers who hire private investigators, who potentially could hire thugs for cash to do these things. How do you think something like this could be proved with respect to Scientology?
Well, if you remember, it was probably 5 to 10 years ago, a gentleman with stage 4 cancer won his civil case against Monsanto. You're talking one single person going up against this monstrous corporation that had literally just been devouring people in court. And it's a matter of, you stick to your guns, you tell the truth. If you have a good, reasonable jury, they're going to listen to the truth, and they're going to decide on the side of right. And that's the thing is that Scientology can say what it wants, but it's like the saying, one person says it's a conspiracy theory. 50 people say it, maybe it's not a theory. So you have 3 different people who are claiming the same actions were happening. All 3 of them had the same actions happening after reporting a sexual assault to Scientology and then leaving Scientology. And suddenly, when the criminal charges are coming about, suddenly they're becoming targets of this harassment campaign and, stalking, whatever you want to call it. But, when you've got 3, 4 different individuals, then you have other people who can testify as to what happened to them. It starts building momentum as it goes. You can have the best attorneys in the world, but a jury sometimes, when they're sitting there and it's just like with Danny himself. The juries can be a very strange thing. You have all the evidence you need to get someone convicted, and there are just people out there that no matter what, I don't like the police, I don't like judges, I don't like our criminal justice system. There's no way I'm voting guilty on anything. So, it's a turkey shoot, literally going in with these juries. But hopefully, you have a good, solid jury that's going to listen to the evidence, and they will side on the right.
Point. That's a great point. And even as you said that, it was like, because people do have that bias sometimes against the institutions, against
Yep.
authoritative bodies and whatnot. And yet in the civil case, you don't have that element. You have this big, bad, notoriously horrible, evil criminal organization called Scientology. You're not going to have anyone on the jury sympathetic to this organization.
Right.
And whereas you could have people on the jury who they have something in their history that makes them not trust cops or not trust women or something like this.
Right.
So the civil case is a completely different beast.
Yeah, and the thing is that that's where this actually plays to the side of the victims or the plaintiffs in this case, is you have this organization that is huge with seemingly unending amounts of funding, and they are going after these three women who say that they were sexually assaulted, which is one of the most heinous crimes you can commit. It doesn't look good for the organization. So if you have a good jury, that's not going to be a good day for Scientology on that one.
That's great. That's great. Well, I should have said in the beginning that maybe we could take some questions because I don't want to just sit here and stare at the chat right now. If you do have a question and you want to throw it up real quick, go ahead. But otherwise, I don't necessarily want to linger. That's extremely helpful to understand that perspective.
Something I wanted to talk about also, I see a lot of it in a lot of the documentaries and things like that about how the private investigators will go and grab people's garbage or have the garbage men give it to them. In most states, Michigan included, once your garbage can hits that easement, which is the area between the sidewalk and the curb or actually out on the street itself, it becomes public domain. And so in a lot of cases, like here in Michigan, when I was working with the different narcotics groups and as a detective, we would routinely do what's called a trash pull. If you had a house that was in question and you needed to see if, I don't know, are they or are they not? You go pull their trash, you suddenly find the boxes for those little tiny Ziploc bags, and you find dozens of those boxes in there. Yeah, it smells like a duck. So, and that actually gets to a point where they'll actually ask, how many trash pulls did you do? What did you find? Because you wouldn't believe what you find out about people looking through their trash.
I can only imagine. So how do the police go about pulling trash?
We show up in the middle of the night after they put their trash out, jump out of the car, throw all the bags in the trunk of the car and drive off.
But not in a marked car.
I've seen them do it in marked cars. I've seen them do it in unmarked cars. Most people, when they put their trash out, they don't look at it. The only time they look at it is the next morning after the garbage trucks should have picked it up.
Wow. Now
most people don't pay attention.
Now with Ring doorbells everywhere, it would just be hilarious to see people posting footage of people grabbing their trash in the middle of the night.
Oh, yeah. Well, think about a lot of people, especially when you get into the cities, they put their trash in the alley behind the house. A lot of people have privacy fences, shrubbery, those kinds of things. You literally roll up with no headlights on, get out of the car, pull their trash bags, throw them away. Most of us use SUVs. You throw them in the back of the SUV, drive off. And no one even knows.
I can tell you that Scientology does that as a matter of routine. They call it special collections.
Yeah, I remember Mike talking about filling his bags up with dog feces and things like that, which I thought was a great thing he did there, because that really gives them something interesting to look at.
Yeah. Even in Philadelphia, where I was on staff for a lot of years, the Office of Special Affairs there, the Director of Special Affairs, the DSA, when word came down from management that there was someone they wanted investigated, and keep in mind, these guys don't have any particular licenses for anything at all.
Right.
They just do.
Well, any person can do it. In a lot of states, you can do what's called garbage picking. Ooh. Oh. It glitched out there for a minute. In a lot of states, you can do what's called garbage picking, where you can literally, when the trash goes out, you'll see the folks go out in their trucks and they're loading them up with all the scrap metal they can find. And you don't have to have some areas they require you to have a license for doing it, a business license for collecting scrap, but most cities don't even pay attention to it anymore. So.
Oh no, that's very common here where I live in Pinellas County in Florida. In fact, if you want to get rid of something, just put it out on the curb. Within an hour, somebody will come and get it.
Oh yeah. Anytime I've got scrap metal, I just put it out at the curb, put a piece of paper on it with a marker on there, free, and within 15, 20 minutes, you'll see somebody stopping and getting it.
Absolutely. Well, great. Thank you so much for helping me understand that a lot better. And everyone who's watching, check out Poe On The Go. That is POE On The Go. I'll put a link to it in the description down below. Any last words?
Just want to say thank you. As always, it's been a great time, and just wish everybody that's watching, hope everyone's safe and healthy.
Awesome. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. We will talk to you soon.